And let me switch this over because right now I'm seeing Kyle's face, because before we start, I always have her pinned onto the video because we're usually talking. And here we are for the last of the 9 precepts called the pause. And we were just discussing the Enneagram of the 9 precepts before we started the video. And so I'm going to take a moment and put that up on the screen again so that everybody can see it. And so here we have it again. And I think that we're going to come back to this. Now, you all see why I say that Kyle is essential to this, because she's actually a better part of my mind than what I carry in my head sometimes.
He carries a lot in there. I just, you know, I help out, definitely.
Yep. You are, in fact, the shock point.
There you go.
All right. Case in point. So everybody's in. Yeah. 10 participants. Life is fun. So any thoughts and questions so far? Anything from last week before we dive into this week's material? And we will get back to that Enneagram, but I realize that I may be jumping the gun just a little bit. So this is me being very, very excited about teaching this tonight. So tonight is the ninth precept. The 9th precept is called Wuquf in Arabic. It comes from the trilateral root waw, qaf, fi. And it basically, it means to halt, to stand, to stop, to pause, to come to a halt. It also means to devote yourself. It also has this sense of a noun in the sense of it means cessation, discontinuation, stoppage, severance, stasis. Hello, Mr. Dog. And it's an interesting word. As part of the Hajj, one of the things that you do one day is called waqaf, which means to pause, and you do this at Mount Ararat, or not Mount Ararat? You do this at one of the mountains, where you actually stop and stand there and look at the mountain and think about things.
It's Arafat.
Arafat, that's it. I'm not sure. Ararat isn't not anywhere near there. Arafat, thank you. And it's a very important part of the ceremony, the entirety of the pilgrimage. So in this case, those of you who have read Mr. Gurdjieff have probably heard about the stop exercise, which he first introduced to the public at the turn of the 20th century in dance performances that he would put on. And he would have his students going through very complex movements, and at a moment he would shout, "Stop!" And they all had to freeze in whatever position they were in, even if that position was totally off balance and they would fall to the ground. They had to maintain that frozen position perfectly until he released them. And this is a spin on an old dervish exercise where all the dervishes are hanging out in the khanaga or the tekke or the durga, depending on what part of the world you're in. And the sheikh would have everybody doing something. Maybe everybody's working the looms or painting or cleaning or whatever. And he would just at some point yell, "Wuquf," and everybody had to freeze what they were doing and find themselves in a state of perfect attention. So, an old tried and true practice. Beg pardon?
I just said it sounds intense.
It is intense. Yeah, especially if you were about to swing your axe down and split some wood, and right in the middle, you have to stop. And you're holding, say, a 3-pound axe, 5-pound axe, depending, splitting maul, whatever, out there at arm's length, trying to be awake for as long as it pleases your teacher to leave you there. You get to watch the monkey mind go crazy. So does everybody recollect having heard something about that particular exercise, either in Gurdjieff or in Sufi stuff or any of that sort of thing?
Some nods. Dave says yes. David says yep.
Good. So, now the 9th precept is in 3 parts. Some people call it 11, but it's actually, it is one thing that represents the affirming, denying, and reconciling aspects of the one thing. Aaron says,
Aaron says, reminds me of the scene from Drunken Master where the master tells Jackie Chan's character, 5 hours, horse stance.
Yep. Or as the sifus around here used to say, "Oh, you tired? Must need more horse stance." Don't like horse stance? Do more horse stance. Yes. Yeah. Practice not working as well? Time for more horse stance. Somehow I think somewhere along the line it made me dislike horse stance. So, the 3 facets of this. Wuquf means pause, and it's also often translated as awareness. I think awareness is not the best translation. I think pause is, in fact, the best translation, the stopping. And it refers to the stopping of a process that is going on inside of you. And what this trains you to do, how to explain this? So, you get a stimulus. The stimulus hits your thalamus. It hits your reticular body. It hits the lizard brain. And if the lizard brain has its way, it sends a signal that says, deal with this stimulus in this particular way. And it becomes rote and mechanical to deal with the stimulus. What the pause does is it stops this natural process of turning over all of your responses to your lizard brain, and allows moments for the higher functions to step in. Do you all understand what I'm saying?
Aaron says
Higher
yes.
functions meaning literally prefrontal cortex functions. The ability to think rationally and without being driven by emotion.
Aaron says not driving on impulse power.
Exactly. And this is the most important thing, the one thing. If I could get everybody in the world to do this one thing, I would think my job is well done. If you can do this thing, it will change your life. Think about it. Your significant other walks in and says something, and you find yourself starting to get pissed off. And at that moment, you hear your inner teacher yell, "Stop!" And you take a breath. And you pause that particular irrational reaction to whatever stimulus came in, and you allow your higher functions, your thought, to examine it and choose the most appropriate response rather than just whatever reaction is programmed in. Does that make sense?
Nods, nods, nods.
Good.
Aaron says yes.
All right. So I would like everybody to learn how to do this. The first 8 precepts that we looked at are the preparation materials you need to be able to do this effectively. And this last bit, in its threefoldness, gives you the last key to this. The first part of the last key is called Wuquf al Zamani. Zaman means like time, like our time, like the pole of our time, the Sufis say, talking about the hidden master, the Wuquf al Zaman. So this is the pause of time. And what this is being able to notice when you are present and when you are absent. And most importantly, when you are present and you notice it, engendering within yourself a feeling of gratitude to the universe for being awake. This is the secret sauce for this practice. When you go, "Oh, here I am," there is this moment of, "Yes, thank you, universe, for allowing me to be aware," only there are no words. If you're talking to yourself, that ain't it. So it's just a sense of what we would call a feeling of gratitude for those times when we are awake. Now, a lot of people, most of them who wear big turbans, say that you should also feel shame and or repentance for those times when you are not awake. I disagree with this. I see no value in feeling bad or asking for forgiveness for not being awake. I see value in noticing when you are awake and being able to take account of the amount of time you spend in the awakened state. I'm going to pull up
while you do that, Nancy suggests that, getting stuck in asking for forgiveness and feeling shame would throw one into the past.
Yes, I think so. This is why gratitude is a present moment state. Shame and that sort of thing is not. So here's an interesting quote. This is from a book called Rashahat Ain al-Hayat, The Beads of Dew from the Source of Life. That's how you translate that. And it says, on this subject, Shah Bahauddin Naqshband says, awareness of time, Wuquf al Zamani, is one of the most effective influences on the outcome of all of the seeker's efforts and exertions, and on bringing him to his goal. It means that the person knows his own spiritual state at every moment and understands whether the state calls for gratitude or apology. This is the part that I disagree with. I know it's incredibly arrogant for me to disagree with a great saint. Nevertheless, I get to do that. That's the advantage of not being a saint, is I can be an asshole. So. Okay, so some other teachers go on to talk about the idea of this having to do with expansion and contraction. And I think that this is also incorrect. In my own experience, that this is incorrect. Expansion is the states in which you're like open and the universe is good and you're feeling connected, and contraction is where you are feeling withdrawn within yourself and the universe feels like it's maybe kicked you once or twice. And I would suggest that you can be awake in either expansion or contraction. That in itself is not where the focus should be. I don't care if I'm in a state of expansion. I can get into a state of expansion just taking a walk. I can get into a state of contraction just by watching the news. Do I maintain my awake state when I do this is the question. Does that make sense? Good. Any questions on this so far? No questions. I'm either doing my job really, really good or really, really badly.
Mushtaq, wouldn't this be considered the ultimate practice then, to keep coming back to the present moment when you realized you checked out?
Yes. Yeah, this is why this is at number 9. It is the alpha and the omega of practice. It suggests that at point 0, What has initiated you onto this course that starts with watching your breath is some moment of pause where you have stepped away from your conditioned thinking or your conditioned experiencing and actually experience the world as it is and go, oh, there is more than just being a meat machine. So that's why this sits where it does on the Enneagram at 0.9. And because of that initial shock, that thing that woke you up, and everybody here has experienced that. If you had not experienced that, you would not be here. Y'all get that, right? This
Some
means
nods.
yes. This means no. Some nods. Good.
Earlier Aaron was
Okay.
saying,
Aaron has a question.
yeah, he had a comment earlier too. I just want to touch on. He said it seems more
Yeah.
valuable to be grateful.
Yes, please. Yes.
I'm sorry. It seems like
Gratitude has real value.
Aaron asks, does it help, maybe only at times, to avoid thinking of this continuum as a problem-solving matrix?
Yes, I think so, because there are no problems in this. Being asleep is not a problem. It is a natural state of humanity, or an unnatural state of humanity, depending on what you think. But yeah, this is not for problem solving per se. This is just for being awake. What happens is that problem solving, or dealing with stimulus, dealing with input, becomes different and in many ways more efficient. Think about some time in your life when something happened that just really ticked you off, and you could feel yourself getting angry and getting ready to explode at something or someone. And think about how nice it would have been if you could have stopped right then and let all of that go and just examine the situation from your higher functions, as it were. Okay. Here's an interesting remark. According to the Venerable Khoja, the structure of the seeker's endeavor is based to the full on the space devoted to awareness of time. In other words, good order in the seeker's spiritual state depends on safeguarding his moment of opportunity. He must be so aware of every breath he breathes that he knows whether he breathed with present awareness or with heedlessness. So let's look for a moment at the idea of a student's moment of opportunity. Theoretically, every breath you take, if you were to take it in full awareness, would be your moment of opportunity. Unfortunately, for most of us, at least if most of us is named Mushtaq, not every breath is done with full awareness. Some of them come in absence. So, being vigilant for those moments and being awake to them, and then when you find them, holding on to them, taking advantage of them. This is what gets you through. I may put Kyle on the spot a little bit here, not too much. She's giving me that look. because she has experienced those moments of opportunity when she had to be awake to making choices.
Mm. Yeah.
And it's sometimes terrifying because it means you've stepped out of your comfort zone.
Yep. Trying to think of specific examples that feel shareable. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's just kind of like
Yeah, a
that
lot of
feeling
that's
of
going to
reckoning.
be very personal.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just that feeling of reckoning, like you really have a serious choice to make, and it's very important to be awake to, at least in my experiences, I experienced it as what was going on in my body was extremely relevant to the decision, and I had to listen to both logic and emotion at the same time and try to stay grounded. And that can be a lot of, but at times it's almost like the answer comes more easily because everything tends to point to the same out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think talking about listening to logic and emotion at the same time is a perfect description of this. You have to be able to pay attention to both, and you can't let one of them rule you. So that is a basic description of the awareness of time. The second pause is called Wuquf al Adadi, which is awareness of number. Now, most people, when they talk about this, you all know what a tasbih is, right? Also called a supah. Yeah, it's a set of beads that you use to tell your. It's like a rosary or a mala. And so people think that if you say recite this or that name of God 100 times or 99 times, that it's going to do something. I will tell you that if you were to recite a name of God one time with full awareness, it would do something. Most people, this has nothing to do with anybody's particular religion. This is like every religion I've ever run across. You know, you go to a Hindu or a Buddhist temple and they're saying their malas, right? And they're saying so fast that they're running the words together and nothing makes any sense and they're not paying any attention. They're just counting so that they can get through it. You go to the Catholic Church and you get to say your rosary, right? Usually as penance. It's punishment to say your rosary. I don't know if people who are not Catholic realize that, but when you go and you make confession, you go and you say, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been 2,400 years since my last confession. And then you tell him all of the horrible things that you've done since then. And he absolves you of your sins. He says, go forth and sin no more. But he also gives you penance where you have to pay for your sins. And it's usually in the form of saying a certain number of beads from the rosary. They call them Our Fathers and Hail Marys. So it's say 20 Hail Marys and 5 Our Fathers and you will be forgiven from your sins. So not only are they forcing you to do something, but they're forcing you to do something that should actually be good as punishment. Catholics can mess up just about anything. So anyway, you're sitting there and you're going through your rosary and you're saying everything so fast. I knew a kid who could say a Hail Mary in 2 seconds flat. It just sounded like one vowel movement, as it were. And I guarantee you, he never spent a moment thinking about what it is that he said. Every Muslim, pretty much at the end of any of the obligatory prayers, takes some time to recite certain of the names of God. And you can do it either using a tasbih, or there are ways to count on your fingers so that you can know how many times you're doing it. And it has also been my experience that people run through that so fast.
I mean, they'll even run through the prayer itself fast. I remember praying with a friend and like,
oh yeah,
he just rushed through the whole thing. It really stressed me out, but you know, they just want to get it done.
So, all of that being explained, the pause of number is not about doing a certain number of recitations of a divine name or anything like that, though that can be an important practice. And we do those things for those people who are actually got their feet on the Sufi path. We work with that. But it is actually the number of times you can do that recitation while awake. It's not quantity, it's quality. Yes. Read what Aaron said.
Yeah. Aaron says, someone I'm a fan of would describe that as taking out celestial insurance. Yeah. Yep. Got to score those points. Yeah.
Yep. And they actually talk about that. I mean, we Muslim types talk about that, looking for extra rewards in paradise. I've heard that phrase so many times. I'm going to do these extra prayers so I get extra rewards in paradise. It's like, dude, if that's what you're doing it for, you ain't got no business doing it.
Yeah. Nancy says, Mormons.
Yeah, don't get me started on Mormons. I had to grow up next to Mormons. So, the idea of the pause of number, and just recently I was teaching my favorite student a little bit about this, how to do the tasbih. Yes, that would be you. How to do the tasbih with full awareness, using the breath and the pause of breath in between each recitation so you can actually feel the meaning of what you were saying. And the meaning is not in words. This is the trickiest part. You can say Subhanallah all you want. It's just the noise you make with your mouth. What it means, what it resonates inside of you is the important bit. And that has no sound. And that's what we're working towards, is to slip the bonds of linguistic abstraction for direct apprehension of the truth. Say that 3 times fast.
How would you feel about repeating that for me so that I can make sure I type it?
I'm not sure I could repeat it.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm
That
sorry.
probably wasn't actually me talking.
Ugh. I hope everyone else caught it. This is the cost of being the...
Well, remember, it's on the recording.
Yeah. Good. Nancy says, staying conscious during ordinary conversation is hard too. Yes.
Oh, yeah. So, there you have an idea of Wuquf Adadi, the pause of number. So, the third one is called Wuquf Qalbi. Qalb means heart. And this, for Americans, this is very, very important that you get that pronunciation down. Do you know why? Okay, qalb in Arabic means heart. Kalb in Arabic means dog. And we don't have the qaf sound in English. So I remember the first time I experienced this, walking in and this guy was doing his beads and he was saying over and over again, without knowing it actually, there is nothing in my heart, or there is nothing in my dog but God. There is nothing in my dog but God. There is nothing in my dog but God. And I thought for a while he was a Zen guy. And then I realized he just couldn't pronounce the word. So learn to say the Q sound. Qaf, not kaf. So the pause of the heart. This is the pasty resistance of the entire thing. So the first part of this means that the remembrance, the dhikr of the practitioner, this goes back to the remembrance that we worked on a few weeks ago, is awake. And it is awake to the truth. That's with a capital T, to the reality with a capital R, or to the truly real, that which is real. It is also experiencing the oneness in the sense of what Ibn al-Arabi talks about with the unity of being. At the point of the pause of the heart, this pause puts you in touch with the unity of the being, where even in experiencing the multiplicity, you realize that the multiplicity is just a bunch of shadows cast by the one, if that makes sense. The second part of this is that the pause of the heart allows you to pass away from linguistic abstraction. The mind speaks in words and symbols. The heart speaks in experience, is one way to say that. All right, let's throw some questions out. Now that I have outlined these 3 pauses, what do you think? I could be completely mad, just so we're clear on that. Stop nodding, Kyle. I saw that.
Okay, I guess I have one. I mean, I
Yes,
see
please.
I see the the awareness of time and the awareness of heart. They make sense to me. I don't the awareness of number seems like almost like an arbitrary insertion there. I mean, I don't count. I don't use a rosary or something like that. I mean, does that assume that everybody's doing some sort of counting trick, and that needs to be aware of what they're doing when they're doing that? I mean, it seems kind of like an arbitrary, whereas the other seem like very fundamental.
It only seems arbitrary because you do not have the practice of it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
This is a specific practice. If I were a sheikh, I might say to you, you need to do this recitation 99 times or 33 times. It's always an odd number. And you need to do it in exactly this way. And you must be awake for every moment that you do it. This is a specific prescription for this person in order to antidote something within them that is getting in their way. So it is not arbitrary. It is very, very specific. But if you don't have the practice of it, it may not completely and totally make sense. But what we are doing is looking at a series of practices. This is not general stuff.
Okay.
All 9 of these are very, very specific. And they are specifically specific to this path. Much of it can be utilized for people who are not exactly on this path, but that are friendly with it.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
Does that make sense?
I see a similar process in another tradition that I work with, but we have no counting aspect to this thing here, and that's what So, but if you're saying this is specific to this particular school of practice, I can see that.
Yeah. And the counting is, like I said, it is not the quantity of recitations you do, it is the quality. That's what you're looking for in the positive number.
Okay.
And the positive number teaches you how to get that quality. More questions? Aaron has a comment similar to a kata. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, a kata would be a physical aspect of this. And as you know, if you were to do your kata in complete consciousness of what you're doing, it becomes seriously more powerful.
Interestingly enough, my Zen friend Junpro, actually calls one of the things he does an emotional kata, where you take like what your typical stimulus is, like you're gonna be afraid of something, and your typical response will be to sort of withdraw from that, and the idea is to stop before you do that, and then I respond more appropriately. And he actually calls those.
Yeah, and that's the pause of time.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that would be the first. That would be the pause of time.
Yeah.
Do we want to just briefly define what a kata is for those who don't?
Oh yeah, a kata is a set series of learned movements used in Japanese martial arts. Generically called a form, doing a form. So you have a series of set movements that are related to each other in such a way and designed to teach people a particular kind of flow. says something that I assume everybody on the planet knows what that word means, but you're absolutely right, because probably a lot of people don't.
There we go. Good.
And Ahmed asks, what does Ahmed ask?
Ahmed asks, do the 3 pauses have a specific sequence to practice?
Yes. They actually have 6 sequences to practice. Why 6?
Processes, then there's 3 forces and the processes.
Yes, the 6 processes. Each of these practices represent one of the 3 forces, and they can be arranged into 6 processes. So how you arrange them linearly will determine the effect that you get from them.
So do a specific one of them be named affirming, and the other is denying, and the third is reconciling, or they can take all places?
Yes. Nope. The pause of time is affirming, the pause of number is denying, and the pause of the heart is reconciling. So do you start the practice with the affirming, or the denying, or the reconciling? Which one is in the middle? So you get 6 possible arrangements of that. But you always start with affirming, denying, reconciling, with involution.
So what would be an example?
And just like the 3 forces, you can't really... Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I mean, I was asking for what would be an example of an application where you would go in a different sequence, right? You know, rather than affirming, denying, reconciling, you know, these awarenesses in a different sequence. I mean, it seems like natural. The sequence you presented here seems like the natural sequence, and I'm wondering what occasion would give rise to a different sequence being the appropriate one.
Well, so the first sequence, the affirming, denying, reconciling, is involution, moving inward. The second sequence would be denying, affirming, reconciling, and that would be evolution, moving outward. So that would be pause of number, pause of time, pause of the heart.
So how would that look? I mean, what kind of practice would that be? I mean, would you start reciting mindlessly and then become aware that you're doing mindless recitations, and then is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
No. But then again, if you have no understanding of the practices, any description I give you is not going to make sense. This is the problem that I'm running into here.
Well, try a description just for the hell of it.
Which, trust me, I am actually trying to think of because to you, if I were doing any one of the 6 variations, it wouldn't look like anything. What it would look like for me would be noting that I am in a state of presence. That would be the number. Here's a moment of presence. 2, feeling gratitude for that presence and marking it in time. 3, allowing that presence to move into the remembrance of the heart. And that will release a particular kind of energy for my work. That's the best description I can come up with.
Okay, that's cool. I mean, that gives me
adequate to the experience.
Yeah, that's cool. That gives me some clue about it. Thank you.
All right, other questions on this? Questions, thoughts. Somebody is coming in, so bear with me for a second. That was just my housemate Ian moving through.
Ahmed says,
So,
how can we use this in our daily busy life, and can we apply it to normal self-development courses?
you can use it in your daily busy life by reflecting upon the fourth precept, which is solitude in the crowd. This is your work. When you are in that state of solitude in the crowd, this is going on inwardly. And the answer is no. You cannot use this in normal self-development courses because this is not normal self-development. If you tried, let me reflect back to a story in Meetings with Remarkable Men. So, Mr. Gurdjieff, as a young man, goes to visit the dervish Boga Eddin, he called him, which is a way of pronouncing Baha'u'ddin. And he says to him, he sits in front of him and says, I have been practicing the retention of breath. I breathe in, and then I hold it for a certain amount of time, and then I release it. What is your opinion of this? To which he replies, to which the dervish Baha'u'ddin replies, may God kill him who presumes to teach and yet does not know. And it's like you read that and you go, whoa. And he goes on to say, if you are going to transform the human being, you must either transform everything or transform nothing. There is no half measures. And in normal self-development courses, all you're doing is working on a few symptoms. And you can tweak some symptoms, give people, nicer symptoms, help people get rid of a few symptoms, but it's not transformation. And what we're doing here is transformation. It's not self-development. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite of self-development. It's self-effacement. What you can do is to use some of the concepts of this to discuss in the self-development courses, and then use that to pinpoint the few people who move through who are actually interested in transformation. And then you make space for them, which is why all of you are sitting here. Does that make sense? So, in my daily busy life, I take pauses throughout the day, usually 5 of them. And during those times, along with whatever else that I'm doing, I make a point of doing these pauses within myself as part of my supernumerary practice. So those of you who have a practice, like any Muslim here knows what I'm talking about when I say 5 times a day, right? Y'all understand that. And there is some pretty strong wisdom into taking those kind of breaks. But if you have a daily practice, add this to it. But check with me first to make sure that you got it right. So does that make sense?
Aaron says it makes sense.
Good. Oh yeah, and Dave asked a question back here that we missed.
Yes, he
Is
asked,
Wuquf Adadi? Yes.
is Wuquf al Adadi a specific antidote practice to one's Enneagram fixation?
I don't know that it's a specific practice, but it will definitely help with that. So probably, yeah, actually.
Dave says thanks.
So, other questions?
It's a question that came to my mind, but I think you might answer it when we go to the Enneagram symbol. Do the dynamic lines here relate those 9 steps? I mean, can we use also the dynamic lines?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's why,
so
that's why I have it drawn out as an Enneagram. Let me pull that up. Yes, it's not only a circle. This is what I wanted you to see in this. So here we are. Here's 1, right? Can you all see my cursor moving?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. So 1 connects to 4 and 7. These are the moving lines to this. If I am the little b in the center, and I'm looking at this process for, say, my students, I would look up to 1 and realize that I need to get them to 4, and I need to get them to 7 at this point. So I will specifically work their breath practice in such a way that I know that it will begin to develop both watchfulness and solitude in the crowd. If the breath practice does not accomplish those 2 things, then I've done it wrong. At 2, again, I look at solitude in the crowd and recollection. So here they are at watching their step. What is it that they're watching for? You know, they are looking at the outcomes that they create for themselves with their actions. And so again, I know that I need to get them to solitude in the crowd. We need to call upon the ability to do recollection at a certain point. And then we get to the journey home, the first shock point down here. I know that they need this sense down here to get through this. At the journey home, when they're sitting there, I look at the idea of the pause and the return. So the journey to the homeland and the return are intimately connected. I mean, think about what it's saying. Return, travel one way, go always to your goal, journey to the homeland, know where it is that you are going on your path, be very clear the outcome that you're looking for. When we move to 4, the little b in the center is looking at the moving lines of 1 and 2. At 4, I have to make sure my student is very, very deeply into their breath practice and very, very deeply into their practice of knowing what the outcomes of their choices are. I can see Kyle right now going, oh yeah, I remember when he did this to me, bastard. And if I have done all of these things correctly as the little b in the center, the person who is going around the outside circle is going to make this leap from 4 to 5. They are going to cross the equator. They are going to step across the threshold or the abyss, depending on your tradition. And they can then enter into a state of remembrance. At remembrance, I have to look upward to watchfulness and recollection. Watchfulness so that you can pay attention to your presence and your absence, and recollection so that you can remember. Recollection has to do with that whole idea of the notions that get in your mind, all of which get in the way of your remembrance when you're working on self-remembering and self-witnessing. Then we get to the return, which is the second shock. Again, you have to make sure that the 3 and the 9 points are considered at this. You get through that, you get to 7. Now 7 goes back to 1. So at this point, me as the teacher is going, okay, my student has got themselves to 7. They need to return to the beginning, but as somebody who can expound upon this, somebody who can now teach it. So there is going to be this movement here of me going, Kyle, teach this person how to breathe. Demonstrate it. Show them.
Yep.
Now, if they successfully do that 7 to 1 line, then they are able to move to the 8. Because this is not returning, I mean, in a certain sense, the kitchen goes back to ready for work, but the person is still going around the circle. This is where they get into the idea of recollection, which is, it's very close to the idea of the remembrance of the heart. And the third shock, the exiting shock, is the pause, the wuquf. And that moves you onto your next Enneagram. Does that sort of make sense as I go through all of those? You see how the moving lines inside are essential to understanding how this process works from the point of view not of the person who is going through it, because they don't really need to know how it works. They just need to do the practices. But from the point of view of you as teacher, and everybody here who is listening to this is a teacher, you need to be able to look at all of these processes standing in the middle. Make sense?
Yeah, and it could be performed both with a teacher and without a teacher.
Yes, it could theoretically be performed without a teacher, but it's so much harder that it's almost insanely difficult. Because there are points in this process where you will be willing to lie to yourself to avoid it.
Can you give an example?
I would think maybe you convince yourself that you're farther along than you are, or you get fed up and give up and think, why am I doing this? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm going to pull up something that I wrote on this.
While you do that, let's see. David has a question. He says, when the student goes all the way through 1 through 9, do they start over at 1 but on a new level?
Kinda. They start a whole new Enneagram. Yeah. Yeah, for
A new challenge begins, that kind of thing.
yes, a new challenge begins, new lessons are learned, all of this kind of stuff. This is taking forever to load up. There it is. Come on, I ain't got all night here.
Is it anything I might have?
No, it's just being slow because I got a lot going on the computer right now.
Yeah. Any other questions before we proceed?
And because I wanted to do this thing. Yeah. Other questions while I am doing this, because I don't want you to just sit here looking at me staring at the screen. I can talk while I look. And if I don't know the answer, Kyle knows the answer. God, it's one of those nights when nobody has any questions.
Are we all sleepy? I know I am, but yeah.
Yeah, you've been entertaining all week, though.
I have,
So,
yeah.
I don't have that excuse.
Aaron says, wide awake here. Good for you, Aaron. My roommate has custody of our guest right now.
Here it is. So
Yeah,
I wrote this in reference
not always
to
things.
the idea of remembrance. Yad card. We talked about this when I talked about this particular thing. This is what happens at this point. Because somebody always comes up with the old, I don't need a guide. I can do it all on my own. After all, Uwaisi al-Qurani did it all on his own, and I have read all the right books and listened to all my inner guidance. And if I do that, then I will get to be a master, TM, without anybody telling me what to do, which is a nice theory and is conceivable. And it is conceivable that anyone could, in fact, do just this and maybe get to the place of real mastery, but most won't. Sorry. There is an old Sufi saying, no one can lie to you like you. The teacher's job is to point out to you when and how you are lying to yourself. There is another old Sufi saying, the one who attempts the path without a guide has shaitan for a guide. Shaitan is just the Arabic pronunciation for Satan. According to Muhammad Shafi, the Sufis feel that maturity cannot be achieved alone. They feel that there is a need for guidance and discipline. The path is unknown, the night is dark, and the road is full of dangers. Dangers include preoccupation with selfishness, false visions, misinterpretation of mystical states, arrested development, fixation in a particular state, appeal to various drugs to create false mystical experiences, and not infrequently overwhelming anxiety and insanity. But that's just a thought. So that's what I wrote on this. And it upsets a certain number of people when I bring this up, because especially we Americans like to think we can do anything on our own and nobody can tell us nothing. But having been a student under the discipline of a number of teachers, I can tell you that I would not be sitting here where I am now if it were not for their grandmotherly kindness in hitting me over the head with large, blunt objects every time I started bullshitting myself. Me being a wet blanket yet again.
Well, I don't think Ahmed was saying, oh, I'm
Yeah.
going to do this to myself. It was just a thought. And yeah.
Yeah, I am using him as a foil to remind everybody that while it is possible for you to create the entire path from first principles, it is definitely not easy. I could not have done it.
Yeah, I tried and it didn't work for me either. So.
So, other thoughts and questions?
Did that make sense, Ahmed? Yeah, cool. Aaron says, better to be 99% right than 100% wrong.
Yep. When is the guide's work done? The guide's work is done when the student is awake. And when the student can hold that state of awakeness continually.
Moshtaq, I was thinking about Dante's guy Virgil. Dante wasn't awake yet, but Virgil was saying, this is as far as I go with you. And up ahead is a threshold that you have to cross on your own. And that is a threshold of fire that burns but does not consume. So I get the sense that he was sending him on his way or encouraging or inviting him to do that, but it was on his own. And he said, this is as far as I go, but I don't think he was awoke yet.
Yeah, probably not. Probably in that particular metaphor, if we can take it seriously enough, and I think that we can, that last step you have to take on your own. I mean, I can't wake anybody up. All I can do is do my best to create the conditions where awakening happens. Ignore the man behind the curtain. Does that make sense? We saw the same thing in the story of the prophet's night journey when he goes up to heaven and Gabriel takes him through all of the heavens, but when it gets to time for him to go to the throne, Gabriel can't take him there. He has to go on his own. Same sort of thing. What do you think, Kyle? Help me out on this one.
Well, I think you need to be self-motivated in a sense. I guess that's what strikes me, is that people can't, for the most part, people can't push you to be awake. They can show you how to do it, but in the end, it's you ultimately who has to be the one to be there.
Yeah, and that's my experience. I mean, Kyle is my oldest student who I'm working with at the moment. Do you remember that point where you actually stopped struggling and fighting and went, I think I'm going to wake up now?
Yeah, I think it was, you know, instead of just making it hard on myself and being like, this is so hard, I can't do it. And then it was like, oh, if I just chill out, I realize it is already happening, and that, you know, the work I put into breaking down my fixations and stuff is working. Once I realized that, I was like, oh my God, it's real, you know.
I remember very, very clearly when that happened for you. It was a little while ago, but it was like, that was the point where I knew, this is all going to work out.
Mm.
Because there was at one point where you could have gone in either direction. You could have gone totally wallowing in your nafs, or you could have stood up against it, and you stood up against it.
Yeah. Yep.
It does happen.
Yeah, I think, are we talking about the breakup?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
And the other events surrounding that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was just kind of like I could either let the person go, or I could be fighting for them forever. And while I did miss them, it was just one of those things where I decided that I wasn't going to let that control how I experienced the world and the choices that I made regarding my own movement in the world.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. For me, watching that from the outside in, it was like watching you choose to live.
Yeah, that was what it felt like. Yeah.
All right. It is 8:30 already. So do we have any other questions? Answers. Yes. Ahmed, speak, please.
Are we going to do, as you mentioned the last session, that we're going to do exercise for the whole thing?
Yes, we are definitely going to do that.
Is this going to be next week or?
No. This is not going to be something that's going to be public.
No.
I think Kyle and I are going to do it. We may invite a couple of you into it, depending on how timing goes. And once we go through all 9 of the practices, then I will put it up. And for all of you who have been members of this particular section and participating in it, you will all get invitations to download it and look at it. And then you can ask questions and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem of how to do this, because this is not something that I want to be public. That whole thing about, you know, either change everything or change nothing. And everybody here is pretty committed, it seems to me anyway, to changing everything. So I feel comfortable giving you this material. Whereas the general public run the gambit between people who are serious and want to do the work, to complete idiots, to con men who could take little bits and pieces and use it in such a way that would hurt people. So that's kind of where I am with that. So did I answer your question clearly enough, Mark?
Yes.
Good.
Great.
Yeah, so in that example, my work as the guide, as the formal guide is done with Kyle, I am no longer the stern teacher who shakes his finger at her and goes, "Wake up!"
Yeah.
We have moved into a whole different facet of the work.
That did happen though. There was some finger wagging.
There has been finger wagging, yes. But we're done with that now. Yeah. She has moved from the lowly disciple to a colleague, which is the whole plan. That's what's supposed to happen.
Yeah, that's you know, the goal. Not everyone has to get there, but I mean, the goal is to not have a bunch of minions who are just like, oh wow, great teacher, thank you for everything you teach me and do for me. Like, it's really to become your own person and to be able to take the knowledge that you gained and I guess pay it forward in a certain way, but certainly to enact it in your own life.
Yep. And the way that the teaching has survived for the last thousands of years is by doing exactly this.
Yeah.
You know, the quality of a teacher is found in the quality of the students that they produce. And the more people they graduate, the better teacher they are. And I've talked about this before. I've talked about running across places where people are supposedly on this great spiritual path, but they never graduate. The teacher is always at the top of the pyramid and they're always below them, and there is never any movement. This is not a real school. In the real school, the student becomes the teacher. The 7-to-1 line is completed.
And if your teacher is pinning you down below them,
no, it's a bad thing. Yeah, I have been because for years I worked as a servant to my teacher. I got to sit in on when the teachers get together and they talk, you know, and listen to what they talk about. And you will have this one group of people who will talk about, oh, I now have this many followers. And that's okay. But then you have this other group of people, and these are the ones that my teacher hung out with, who would say, I have raised this many people up to the level of Khalifa, who are now my deputies and go out and teach. And that's a more interesting group to me. I much more enjoyed serving tea to them.
Do you want to talk about servanthood at all, or do you want to save that for another time?
I think we should save that for another time, because that's going to take an hour, or at least even to touch on what that actually means.
It's not what it seems like at face value. We'll put it that way, and we'll definitely talk about it another time.
Yeah, it's good to remember that if you go into a Sufi house, the second highest person there is usually the guy who's serving you tea. All right. Any more questions? No? Well, I'm going to stop the recording then.